From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined, as always, with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Deckens. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this stuff they don't want you to know. We'll start at a weird but very human direction here. Who hasn't, amongst us in the audience today, felt lost at one point or another? Think about it. Washing the dishes. You're working maybe on a repetitive job, or you're stuck in traffic. You've heard the same song 3 times. You're walking up the street, the same path you always take, and it hits you all of a suddenly. What does it all mean? Why are we even here? What's the point? Is existence just like a checkmark participation grade? It's an existential...
Yes, Ben. Yes.
All of those? Okay, great. Me too.
That is bleak, fellas. That is bleak.
Oh, no? You haven't hit that yet? No.
Oh, God, yes. Are you kidding me? I have to use my GPS when I go down the street to the store. I mean, okay, that's a different kind of loss. But absolutely, of course. I think we've all been there.
And this existential crisis is one of the great unifiers, I would argue, of the human species. It draws a lot of people to structured belief systems, religions of any type, humanitarian work, secular stuff too, even self-improvement on a small scale. Like, hey, I'm going to exercise more. I'm going to take up meditation. I might get a new hobby. Heck, I'll take that improv class. These are all answers to the scary questions of mortality and meaning, and there is no shortage of individuals or organizations that are more than willing to give the lost and the troubled a feeling of serenity, fulfillment, and purpose. This brings us to today's episode, the winding, mysterious, and at times troubling story of something known as the Falun Gong. In English, this literal translation would be something like law, wheel, practice, but it's a tricky thing to translate into English. So for now, we're just going to say Falun Gong. So breathe deep. Here are the facts.
So Falun Gong is also known as Falun Dafa, and if you look at some of the official websites, you will see Falun Dafa a lot. It describes itself as a spiritual practice, as Ben just described earlier. It's rooted in Buddhist tradition, and it consists of 2 primary components that feel pretty good. The first one is self-improvement through the study of teachings. And like many organizations, Falun Gong or Falun Dafa has its own set of books and writings and teachings. And these are mainly about the qualities of the universe, the underlying stuff, the stuff that makes up existence, you and me and the connection to everything, truth, compassion, and forbearance. If you go on their website, it says very specifically, truth, compassion, forbearance.
The second component is going to be pretty, I would say, pretty familiar to a lot of us, and that is gentle exercise and meditation. By gentle exercise, we mean what is sometimes called low-impact exercise. So this is not CrossFit, push yourself past your limits stuff. This is stretching. This is slow. This is meditative. This is not meant to break your bones. According to all the sources you can look at, including official Falun Gong sources, it was developed by a guy named Li Hongxi. He says that he was the recipient of teachings from more than 20 masters, Buddhism and Qigong, from which Falun Gong is descended. He tested this, according to him, he tested this practice, this system out with several followers, aka disciples first, and then eventually brought it public in May of 1992. So this is already, we know, this is a very new religion, even if the claims about its ancient roots are true. Qigong is, we talked about this earlier, I think, in an episode called What is Qi, but Qigong is primarily composed of these frankly amazing breathing exercises. But Lee added something else to the mix. He added stories in here, accounts, anecdotes, a world full of fantastical things, and a world with hints of a forthcoming apocalypse. And his books became bestsellers. I don't want to poison the well here, but some of this path has, not for nothing have outside observers said this bears some similarities with other leaders of movements like L. Ron Hubbard, who also wrote extensively. But this was accepted by the government of China. It was accepted by the Qigong bodies, right? Because there are many Qigong movements. So the Chinese National Qigong Scientific Research Association, in that same time period of 1992, they also said, okay, yeah, we dig it. Falun Gong, you know what I mean? Full speed ahead.
Ben, can we just really quickly hit on those two books?
Yeah, totally. The first two were Xuan Falun and Falun Gong. These are kind of primers to the philosophy. Mm-hmm. Here is what we're doing based on what I learned. Here is the goal of what we're doing. You know what I mean? Filled with stories that did not ordinarily occur in previous traditions of this sort.
Oh, yeah. And I just want to go back to your L. Ron Hubbard comparison here. It's interesting because in L. Ron's writings, he kind of held off on the aliens and the stuff that went beyond some of the self-healing.
He saved that business for when you paid your way in far enough.
Yeah, but in these books, it's just right there in front of you as soon as you start getting into the materials. I found that to be interesting.
Yeah. There's I guess you would say a little more transparency in that regard. But whatever you feel about those things, we want to be very clear here. We ourselves are not Falun Gong practitioners. Although I think all of us have done things like meditation and mindful breathing and yoga. This is a different thing. And no matter how you feel about the claims that Lee makes, no matter how you feel about the practices of the organization in terms of exercise and philosophy, there's no arguing this. Those books were instant bestsellers, and people across the country of China loved this idea, loved this concept, and Lee started making public demonstrations of his perceived abilities, which also ties in a little bit to our episodes on faith healing and laying on of hands.
Okay, so back to the timeline. In December of 1992, Li Hongzhi did his very first public demonstration of his abilities at the 1992 Oriental Health Expo in Beijing. Apparently, he caused a paralyzed and wheelchair-bound man to walk destroyed gall and kidney stones within another individual, and cured difficult and complex illnesses of all kinds. So needless to say, he made quite a splash. And the director of the fair declared, he's like, you won the fair. He declared that Falun Gong was the star cultivation system.
Oh.
Wow. What does that even mean? Like cultivating like the stars from the galaxy?
I took it as a best in show.
Best in show, but still, I love the turn of phrase. Let's leave it there. To me, it really is like you're, the brightest shining boy in the room.
Well, as Ben said there, the laying on of hands episode that we did, I think everyone can hear the similarities there. And, we weren't there in 1992. We can't tell you exactly what happened, or if there were any plants in the audience. But if those things were true, they would be miracles.
Well, I was, you guys know my schedule. I was busy. I just didn't get over there.
Yeah.
But I heard good things.
I was 9, I think, and doing something with a Nintendo. Pretty sure.
I don't think I should say where I was, but in December of 1993, at the 1993 Expo, Lee was given 2 awards. This is, the second iteration of his appearance there. He got the award for Advancing Boundary Science and the Qigong Master Most Acclaimed by the Masses. So that's like And I am not dismissing this at all. Just for an analog or a comparison, this is a lot like saying you got the Audience Appreciation Award.
Yes.
You know what I mean? People like you the most. So he started giving classes all over the country in the ways of this philosophy throughout the early to mid 90s. And for a while, as we mentioned, this enjoyed a great deal of domestic fame, as well as what appeared to be somewhere between the open support of the Chinese government to the tacit support to, at the very least, toleration of it, right? Like, they're not hurting anyone. They're not violating our unwritten law. Don't mess with the money. Let them go stretch in the park.
Exactly. And in a way, it's kind of a nice little cultural, at least information export, right? It's an interesting thing. It's a cool little piece that we can share. And wow, we've got this, I wouldn't say miracle worker, but we've got someone with essentially supernatural powers that practices in China. Cool. Enjoy. Be healthy. All good.
Yeah. This goes international soon after. Like, when you think about the spread of this movement, you have to say it's impressive. You know, a few decades later, people would call this kind of growth viral instead of exponential. By 1995 or so, Lee is spreading his message past the borders of China. He's lecturing in Paris and Stockholm. He's lecturing in Sydney and Houston, Texas, which seemed a weird draw, but these are the facts, and New York City in 1996. But while he's out speaking abroad and spending less and less time in China, things aren't going so well on the home front, are they?
No. The tide was turning inside of China while he was gone, because in 1995, the organization Falun Gong left the one that it had originally joined, the Qigong Scientific Research Association, which, you know, could or could not be a big deal. But it does mean they're going independent, right? It means they're gaining power in some way. And the Chinese government started to see them as essentially a threat. And it's really because they were growing so exponentially and so quickly. And some of these spiritual beliefs, the religious teachings that were in those books, they were going a little bit against what would be considered traditional, or at least the party line of what the party wanted its citizens to be thinking about, believing in. And ultimately, they feared that this thing would grow so big, it would be a threat because it was independent of a lot of those internal institutions.
Yeah, and you know, this doesn't come from nowhere or necessarily uninformed paranoia. There is a long history in this area of the world, going back to the dynasty days in China, of the governing bodies having to actively and aggressively work against the possibility of domestic dissent. In a way, the government at the time was reacting to what they saw the precedent set by earlier domestic unrest.
What is it that you think about this religion, this movement that caused it to catch on so much?
It's just very appealing, I think, if you look on the face of it. It's extremely appealing. You don't have to work too hard. It's mostly meditative, and it seems to have a kindness on the front. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the ways the ideas are spread and why they seem, especially when you bring in the persecution angle that we're going to get to, why it seems like something you'd want to join to fight for.
And the majority of, from what we understand, the majority of Falun Gong members are recruited by members of their biological families. So there is a furthering and a deepening of the sense of community in this endeavor. And community, from what I understand, is a thing that people like. It's true. People dig it. So as you said, the tide's turning against the practitioners of Falun Gong because it's seen as a threat to the status quo. We know that somewhere in this time period, members of Falun Gong started becoming active online. They were early adopters of the internet. But it's difficult to know exactly when this occurred because, like the Rhetors in Neil Stephenson's Anathema, they spend a lot of time changing the past. Or a more diplomatic way would be to say, and I mean both the Chinese government and some factions of Falun Gong, they carefully edit and curate old material from their websites. So it's tough to know some of the specifics of timelines here, but they didn't take this lying down. They got mad, and the practitioners started protesting outside of various media outlets in China that if they felt those outlets were misrepresenting the goals of Falun Gong and the lives and aims of the practitioners, basically saying, stop being evil. That's it. That's not like on the face of it. That's a cool thing not to be.
Yeah.
Don't be evil. Google once did that, and no longer does.
I remember those days.
It's no longer their motto, right? But also, don't be evil's way different from be good.
Yeah, very much
I always
so.
thought that was a weird one. Was it like sort of like a guiding principle, sort of a reminder to themselves to like do a good job with the power that you've given yourselves? It's a weird one. I always thought that was very strange.
So this is 1990, like we've led up to 96, right? That's when they're doing the protesting. Then the next year, as pressure is mounting from the party within China, Li, he ends up getting out of China. And where does he head?
New York City.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you can make
wasn't he beginning to be branded as a dissident
already?
Yeah.
For years before. What I was going to say is, just picture Lee somewhere. He's been to New York before at this point, and he says, "Hey, kid, you can make it here. You can make it anywhere." And then he has that whole sitcom moment. Yeah, he does. He does go to New York. He knows something's in the wind, I would imagine. And let's pause here. We've got one. We're waiting for the other shoe to drop. So let's hear from our sponsors, who may not be Falun Gong today, or maybe we don't know.
It's probably not Falun Gong, but it is Shen Yun.
Spoilers. We'll be back to watch the hammer fall. Fast forward, 1999. There's a massive protest against the government of China on the part of the Falun Gong. Shortly after that protest, the PRC begins a nationwide crackdown, and they go ham. There's this huge propaganda push. Their aim is to eradicate the Falun Gong. How serious are they about this? Well, they make a new security agency whose entire job is to eliminate Falun Gong. It's called the 610 Office. It was started in June of 1999. To describe some of the stuff that the government was doing against this organization, they were bulldozing educational tapes. You know what I mean? They were pulling all the stuff they could off the internet if possible. They were publicly denouncing any members. If it got to the point where, like, depending on your job, it might be dangerous for your employment status to be a member of Falun Gong, and then soon after, it may be dangerous for your personal freedom. They also blocked. They didn't just block Falun Gong websites. They blocked websites from other places, and there were a few other countries that mentioned Falun Gong. They were like, sorry, I know your blog is mainly about your backpacking travels through Southeast Asia, but you mentioned the wrong organization, so now your whole website is shut down for 1.3 billion people.
Wow.
So imagine you start as an exercise group, and the next thing you know, you're in a full-on information war with one of the world's most powerful countries, a country that's also becoming one of the world's leaders in this kind of asymmetrical warfare. This gets David and Goliath pretty quickly, if the story so far is true.
And this is a good time to bring this up, maybe, Ben. In our research for this episode, and Ben, you pointed this out, and I also noticed it, and Noel, I'm sure you did too. Really what you find on the internet, save for a few mostly objective writers, is information that is extremely pro Falun Gong Or extremely anti Falun Gong, right?
Well, even the American media for quite some time was very pro Falun Gong, it would seem, because they sort of acted as this like buffer against like the, the distrustfulness that is pretty common around like Chinese information control. And they sort of represented almost this like, example of the heavy handedness of the Chinese government. In fact, there's an interview with the founder of Falun Gong in Time magazine in 1999. So, I mean, in general, the American press was pretty kind to them as an organization.
The U.S. would enter this information war later for motivations of its own. I suspect motivations of its own, but maybe I'm being a jerk. So back in 99, same year as that Time interview, Falun Gong becomes illegal in China. However, the horse of dissidents has left the proverbial barn. The followers are widespread. And another thing that maybe the PRC didn't count on, these followers are tremendously media savvy. Remember, I said they were early adopters of things like the internet and emergent technology. So in the years since being declared a, quote, heretical organization that threatens social stability, they have dispatched thousands upon thousands of press releases, these staged live events and protests, things that are purposefully and beautifully designed to gather headlines, to get international eyes on the story. They've also kept a very strong internet presence. You can check out some of their official territories online now. They also became increasingly litigious, and they would slap people with a defamation lawsuit if they published something saying stuff that to us might even seem innocuous. They would still try to bring the hammer down the way that the Chinese government was bringing the hammer down on them. And like we alluded to just a few minutes ago, Falun Gong adherents for a very long time were treated in an extraordinarily kind way by the Western press. They loved this David and Goliath story. They also sometimes supported the group's religious or political agendas. As you can imagine, Falun Gong becomes very strongly anti-Chinese government. And when it broke in the West, when the U.S. and Europe started entering this, you would see a lot of reports from politicians and journalists who were ridiculing the Chinese government. And they were saying, wow, these communist leaders are so paranoid, AKA they know their ideas are so bad that they're going to treat this group of, quote, exercising grannies like counter-terrorists. And they all had a good laugh about that, right, in the news cycle of the time. And they got some facts wrong while they were doing it. They got one big fact very much wrong.
That's right. Western sources originally had claimed that the PRC was reacting to popularity alone. They argued that the Communist Party had 60 to 70 million members, but Falun Gong had 100 million. And this did not seem to be the case. Multiple scholars agreed that the Falun Gong only had about 2 to 10 million practitioners at that time. Also, why weren't remember, this is all a product of a larger movement, the Qigong movement. Why weren't other practitioners of those techniques banned?
Right. There are multiple groups that are descended from this ancient tradition of mindfulness and exercise and meditation. And they seem to be just fine. Nothing wrong with those folks. Sadly, as any longtime listener of this show knows, it is the opposite of unusual for world governments to repress movements they see as dangerous to the status quo. On so many levels. There's an abundance, a plethora, I'm using the word correctly, of ridiculous examples of this. But if you dive into this, upon closer examination, we see that Falun Gong looks a lot different from the casual Qigong group or even like a CrossFit club. And while we were prepping for this, folks, it became increasingly difficult for us not to continually ask ourselves about CrossFit. which got out of hand for a second there. I think we can agree. CrossFit got a little out of hand.
Yeah, oh, it did. And I, for one, promise that I will hunt down the CrossFit demons and aliens that exist in the originating book somewhere that I've just never seen or read.
Yeah, I did CrossFit for a little while years ago, like had like a trainer situation. I can tell you from firsthand experience, the demons and aliens live in those T90X stretchy bands. That's where that comes from.
I'm a P90X guy.
T90, P90, clamato. But it was they do sneak the Christian stuff in very subtly. You know, right when you're getting the most swole, and then all of a sudden they sort of whisper some scripture into your ear.
Wait. Maybe I just have no idea. Is CrossFit a religious organization or arm?
Kind of. Yeah.
Wow.
Maybe it depends on the trainer too.
No, I've always heard that CrossFit has sort of some kind of religious undertones.
I was joking about hunting that down, but now I'm serious.
Maybe I'm overthinking it too. There are definitely Christian CrossFit organizations, and like here's an article here: how turning CrossFit into a religion made its atheist founder Greg Glassman rich. Oh, interesting. Okay. Huh. So CrossFit itself is the religion, not necessarily a front for religion.
Yeah. So when we go back to Qigong and Falun Gong, what we see is that it isn't the same in many ways. And this is something that practitioners of Falun Gong would agree with. There is a web of conspiracy here. It's tough to suss out the strings of truth, right, in this morass. There are allegations of everything from organ harvesting to cults to even front groups for intelligence agencies. So let's dive in. Deep breath. Here's where it gets crazy.
Yeah, China's state-run media outlet Xinhua had a completely different take on why Falun Gong was being banned. They claimed that the West was attempting to make China look bad. They believed, and argued accordingly, that the Chinese government banned Falun Gong because Li had broken numerous laws, was responsible for over 1,000 deaths, mainly from essentially coercing members into committing suicide or by not seeking medical treatment, which is a part of this whole, belief system that we'll get into, was threatening public safety, and because members had infiltrated the Communist Party in order to overthrow the government. That's a lot. And it sounds, like the kind of high-level conspiracies that's like we live for. Things like Operation Snow White. Sounds a lot less like, just doing Tai Chi in the park on a Sunday afternoon, right?
Yeah. And anyone listening may remember Operation Snow White, wherein the Church of Scientology, or a few members of the Church of Scientology attempted some infiltration.
All right. So now I can feel the shadow of our legal team.
I know.
Okay. So it's very careful with the writing on that one. The official position of the Church of Scientology is that Operation Snow White was not sanctioned by their organization as a way to massively infiltrate the IRS and then blackmail the government in a crazy financial scheme.
Oh, good.
Several people disagree with that official position, including the U.S. Supreme Court.
Wow, man.
Right? Like, that's what we could say. We said that earlier, right? There are people who disagree. So we have Mike Rinder on. I mean, our ship has sailed in that regard. But there is one thing, that they said that's really interesting here, Noel. The idea of infiltration of the government. That was true.
Yeah.
The Chinese government was telling the truth about this one. Falun Gong was all up in the state's military and the security apparatus and the media, educational establishments as much as possible. It's explicitly mentioned in one of Li's books, Falun Gong. He talks about putting focus on getting support from state government leaders, like from these officials. And interestingly enough, if you read the English and French translations of these books, those specific mentions have been cut from the text. See, the past is changing. But in all fairness to Lee, in all fairness to the practitioners of Falun Gong, we have to point out, seeking powerful friends is not the same thing as planning a coup. You want to get like a member of a high-ranking member of the Communist Party on board with Falun Gong, well, then maybe first it's because you think it's good for them, you know, on a purely physical level. And then maybe secondly, you're like, hey, this person could help us out with a jam, especially if we're being misrepresented. We have someone on our side who can say, here's the truth, and this is not propaganda. So it's not the same thing as a coup, I would say.
It sounds a lot like The Family to me, another episode we covered, where evangelical Christianity was at least making those friends, right, in high places and actively working to increase just influence within those realms. Not necessarily causing a coup.
Is that the episode where we got a little bit lost trying to figure out what the menu for the prayer breakfast was?
Yeah, I was just thinking, I was like, well, I don't know, why am I thinking about eggs right now? That's right. There was that massive prayer